you all can see my screen. Again, I'm Randy, and I do most of the development on the Tiller Labs add-on. Today, we're going to do a quick demo of the manual transactions workflow in Tiller Money Labs. So let me just open that up. Basically, this workflow is designed to help you with two things. The first is that, as you can see in a transaction sheet that should be familiar to you, there are a lot of columns. And for data integrity purposes, it takes a long time to go and basically put the right data in all the cells if you were to manually add a transaction. So the first thing that this workflow is going to help you with is basically filling out a row completely so that all the downstream templates and dashboards can access all the relevant fields. The other piece that this is going to help you with is if you put in a manual transaction, like let's just say you write a check, you want to recognize that there's a sort of that expense outstanding, but it might take a few days or maybe weeks before the recipient cashes it. So you want to basically have a way of tracking that that money has been spent, even though it might not show up in your feeds until the recipient goes and cashes it, and then it comes in your transaction sheet. At that point, you would have two of that same entry, one that you entered manually and one that came in through feeds. And so this tool is also designed to help you kind of find those charges and reconcile them into a single charge so you don't have duplicates in your transaction sheet. So we're going to demo both of those features right now. So I'm in the Tiller Money Labs add-on. Hopefully you've seen this before. We're going to click on Tools, and then we're going to go into the Manual Transactions pane. Here you'll see basically two options. Let me move the screen so I can see them. The first is Add a Manual Transaction. This is how we basically enter a new transaction, and reconcile helps us find matches and then turn them into a single record. So I'm going to start with adding a manual transaction. So here, I mean, this should look basically like an entry into a checkbook with all the kind of normal fields. You can do a deposit withdrawal. We're going to do a withdrawal. We're going to say on the 22nd, we made a $50 deposit to the PTA actually, I'm going to do that 100. And then let's say that's check number 1001. And this is Garfield High School PTSA. And hopefully you have donations. And then you can basically say which account this is coming from. So basically the add-on scanning your spreadsheet, finding out what accounts are live in it, and you basically can pick an account here. We'll use primary checking. And then here's an important option. You can basically flag it to eventually be reconciled. If you run the reconcile wizard and this flag is set, this flag will kind of be visible to the reconcile wizard and it'll look for matches for it. If for some reason, like maybe on an unlinked account, you will never see another sort of a matching transaction come in, it's probably best to not flag it for reconciliation to avoid false positives. So now at the bottom of this pane, we have two options. One is we can just add this transaction and be done with this workflow, or we can add transaction plus one. So we're going to add a transaction and sort of leave the pane, reset the pane to add a second transaction. So I'm going to add two transactions. So I'm going to press this lower one. And here we should see this new transaction we just created. Here's the date. You can see some of these fields that are important. They match the account name, week, month, and week. These are ones that are a little bit fussy sometimes to put in if you're doing it manually. You can see the institutions here, the account number. All these fields are populated for you, and you can also see here that it has this temporary transaction ID, which we use for the reconcile wizard, which has a manual prefix. Let's add our second transaction. This one will be on the 23rd. Let's also do $100. This will be check number 1000. Let's just say we paid the house cleaners with a check. And now I'm going to press add transaction again. So you'll see another transaction kind of come into the top of the spreadsheet here. So at this point, these will show up in all of our tracking tools, our budgets, our cash flow analysis. And it will take a quick peek in a hidden column here called metadata, and this gives information to the reconcile wizard that basically this manual transaction has been flagged for reconciliation. That's this true here, but that's kind of a hint to the tool that this one we should keep an eye on this transaction. All right, so now I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna do a reconciliation. I'm gonna show you, let's pretend we ran our feeds and that these new transactions came in. These are coming in from feeds. You can see that instead of having these manual transactions, they have normal tiller transaction IDs. So I'm gonna hit the reconcile wizard. It's gonna find first it's gonna look for transactions flagged as manual transactions with reconciliation. You can see it found 2, and we can set the date range. So when we get one of these transactions, plus or minus 15 days currently, we'll look into the future and past around that transaction, look for basically a matching transaction amount on the same account. And you can change this. If you go up here, you might get more false positives. If you go down here, you might miss something if a recipient didn't cash a check for a while. So we're gonna search for matches. It's gonna scan the whole sheet and look for possible matches. And you can see here that basically we have these these are our 2 transactions that were manual. We have two unreconciled transactions with possible matches. We can flip between them. I mean, honestly, they look pretty much the same, but you can see this field here changes when I go between them, and also the check number. They're both $100. And so here are 3 possible matches, which are basically these fields right here. And these would have been the transactions that came in from Tiller Money feeds. So in this case, this was check number 1001. These are all possible matches because they all have the same dollar amount and they were all in the same account. I can choose to ignore a transaction if it keeps on coming up and I know it's not the right one, so I'm gonna press ignore there. And I can bring it back to life by unignoring it here. But for now, I'm basically gonna just take check number 1001, see that that's the match here. And what you'll see here is in our manual transaction on check 1001, which is this one, you can see we added some information like a category and a description. The one that came in from feeds, the feeds didn't have that information. So you can see some of these fields are blank. So when they're reconciled, you'll see it will keep these fields we manually entered. So I'm gonna call this the match here. Whoa, there should have been a second match on this one. Let's complete this process and let's understand why, I'll try to understand why the house cleaner one didn't find the match. So I'm gonna press reconcile and update, and you'll see that this transaction should disappear. It gets merged into this, this transaction. So now we only have a single line item for that one transaction. And then you can also see this transaction ID that was previously manual and kind of flagged for reconciliation has now gotten the transaction ID that came in from feeds. Let me just run this reconcile wizard one more time and see if we can find that last transaction. So it found it. This is going to be the house cleaner one. And so here, this is the one with check number 1000. We'll press match on check number 1000, match, reconcile, and then again, you'll see these 2 merge into one. And so essentially that's the workflow. Heather, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that was great. Thanks, Randy. All right, so if we have any questions, you can go ahead and pop those into the Q&A and we'll work through your questions as they come in. Looks like we have no questions right now, so definitely get your questions over there, or we can just keep it really short and sweet and wrap up. You know, one thing Randy mentioned was that when you add those manual transactions in, because they're basically pending at that point, and so they do affect your cash flow. So if you kind of show them, Randy, on like the monthly budget tab, once you add those manual transactions in as kind of pending, it's gonna affect that this month's cash flow to date figure, which is really nice if you're trying to plan for cash flow and you want to kind of just go ahead and get some transactions in there to see how it's going to affect your cash flow for the month. So that's one really great feature of that too, is like it can help you with the projected cash flow. Mark asks, if each month you have a standard set of manual transactions with the same description, vendor, etc., is there any way to streamline the entries so that you don't have to input each one individually each month?
That's a good question, Mark. I think I'm just, essentially you saw that the manual transaction was created with essentially static fields for most things, like so for example, if I wanted to make that house cleaner payment every week, This would be the same, this would be the same, the amount would probably be the same, the account would be the same. And then there's basically a few fields that would probably change, like the month and the week, if you cared to keep those up to date, maybe use them for a pivot table. The fields that would change would also be this manual transaction ID. I believe, I haven't tested this, but I believe you could basically generate your own number there and basically feed that in. So Heather, if we don't have another question, I could probably show how this would work.
We do have one more. I was also going to recommend that workflow as an alternative that John has shared on the community, where you just have like that separate sheet. Is that what you were going to demo?
Yeah, I was just going to try and mock that up. Should we do that, or should we take the next question?
We only have one other one, so that, yeah, I think if it's pretty quick.
So just how I would do something like that is I would, let's make a manual transaction just so we kind of have, we can kind of reference the format. So let's say that it's $100. By the way, I keep making this mistake, but this amount is smart. If you put in withdrawal, it's going to basically enter into the sheet as negative 100. When you put 100 here, if it's a deposit, it will be favorable here. So I don't need to put a negative in front of this. Let's leave the check number off. Let's say house cleaner, weekly payment, household, and then let's say that's the account. So I'm going to add that transaction. This is how I would do this. I would copy these two columns here. So basically your columns in your sort of source sheet that you're going to paste from match up exactly with the format of this transaction sheet. And I'd paste the header row and also the row of data into this sheet. And then I would do something here. Again, if you have these fields and you care about them, you could change this to be something like that. So this little formula here, end of month of the data in B2, take the last day of the prior month and add one day to it. That's how I would do this. So let's just say now we want to do one for next month is 7/15 is the date of the charge. You can see that this will push up to 7/15. And honestly, the week one, if you want to ask that question in the community, I can help with that, but that one would take another second for me to do manually or kind of live. I'd have to think through that a little bit. Here's the field that you would want to create a unique number on. And what we're looking for here is a prefix with the word manual. So here I would do something like, I'd use like that, and then I would just and on, or concatenate on some more stuff that basically made a unique string here. So I'd probably concatenate on the date, concatenate on that, maybe that, but basically pick enough things that kind of create some random text here so that it's going to be a unique number. Presumably you won't have other ones that are on the same date, but you can kind of see how basically all those pieces of information just created a unique number. That's what I would do. And then you can see here that because we set this up using the add manual transaction workflow, that this is already set up properly to look for reconciliation. So it's set up reconcile true, and we're not ignoring any IDs yet because we haven't gone through the wizard and press ignore. So basically this is kind of set up, and maybe if date added, you want to do this, maybe it's B2. I mean, that's the same as, way over here. So effectively, once you get this whole thing wired up, you could go and just change the dates. Let's just say there were a couple more rows just like this in here. And then when you're ready to add those in manually, you could just insert a few rows here and copy this stuff, paste it in here, probably do paste special values only. And now you can see we have that in there. You can see here we have two of these guys now, but the reconcile wizard should find them both because they were both set up properly. So this number should be 2. And now it's going to look for matches on those 2 transactions. I'm sorry if that was a long description, but hopefully that makes sense. Heather, did you want to clarify anything on that?
That made sense to me.
Okay.
I think we can also share that standard transactions template in the community, like I can just pull that out of this sheet and just share it in the Q&A so that folks can have it and see the formulas. So maybe just after the call, going ahead and getting that week formula set up would be really helpful for folks. And then we can add some instruction, because I think that's something that people ask for a lot, and that would really help them. And it's like, you whipped it up really quick. So that was great, Randy. Thank you.
Heather, the only thing I was going to add to that is if we did share this, I think we can do that. It'd be helpful, but people will just want to keep an eye on if their column order matches up exactly.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's see. We got another question from the other Mark. I use split transaction for my monthly paychecks where I include tax withholdings, HSA deposits, etc. If I enter this manually, would it be able to reconcile with the single deposit transaction that shows up from the bank? And the answer to that is no, because that single transaction, you know, it's only looking at the amount, which is the whole amount. It's not going to know that all those, you know, splits need to happen against that transaction when it's brought in via feeds. But you could use a similar workflow to the one that Randy just demoed. You would just have to, I mean, I guess you'd still just have your paycheck transaction come in as the full paycheck, and then these are expenses that are in addition with every paycheck. You could use a similar like standard transactions workflow like that. Does that make sense, Randy? Do you have other thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I was just going to say, I would want to double check the code, but I believe that for a reconciliation match using this reconcile wizard, I think what we're looking for is an exact, like to the penny match on amount. We're looking for a date match within that range that you can specify on the slider. And then I believe also we're looking for an account match. And I'm not quite sure if that's, it probably first looks and sees if you have an account ID column, then it might move to this account number column. But it's basically looking to see that the manual transaction is on the same account as the feeds account. So yeah, if you split it, it's not going to match up on the dollar amount. But yeah, what Heather said makes sense. You could basically create a sheet like this where you could basically copy in those values, or you could basically use the same workflow we just demonstrated for manual transactions, basically for a standard split.
Great, thanks, Randy. All right, so Mark asks, if you wanted to load in a number of repetitive monthly manual expenses that you are not going to need to reconcile against anything, can you do so for the rest of the year now and be done with it? Will that cause any reporting issues?
I don't think that'll cause a reporting issue. I don't even think you'd necessarily, if you'd wanted to use, I mentioned at the beginning that there's two reasons to use this manual transactional workflow. One is to populate all the fields quickly and accurately and easily. And the second is basically to kind of set this field up right here under metadata properly to look for reconciliation. I believe if this is blank, it will never get flagged for reconciliation. So you could use the add manual transactions and set the reconcile flag to false, don't use this. Or you could probably just create a record manually and just not even have this populated.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. I think the same thing, if it's, you know, if you have a number of repetitive monthly manual expenses, just inputting them this way with like a standard transactions, leaving that metadata column blank is probably going to be the fastest way versus doing it in the add manual transaction flow, just because you would have to do it one by one. I could see that being a really useful feature though, if there was a way to like choose the recurrence of a manual transaction, like we could, you know, having a drop down that's like once a week, once a month. Yeah. That'd be pretty cool. But as of now, yeah, you could use this sort of standard transaction flow, and it shouldn't cause any issues with the reporting. No, it would actually help you, you know, project cash flow and things like that. So.
Right, and you could add something here where you know, use that end of month. Well, you could actually you could write a formula here pretty easily that just move this to the next month. That would look like you know, date, and then get the year from the one above it, a month from the one above it, but then add 1 month, so the next month, and then day from the one above it. So this will kind of create a transaction on the next, the formatting is a little off here, but you can see that it's basically, and then you could start to use just point up to the row above. And using this, you could basically create, you can imagine this sort of pattern going all across all the columns here, but you can see very quickly, you could basically create a big set of rows that you could put in manually.
You definitely want to use that paste special values only trick though.
Yeah, you could definitely end up with some weirdness if it were looking at random cells in your transaction feed. But my point is just this standard transactions kind of sheet, pull in, just create a single row and then use a formula sort of like this to basically just change the rows out. The way we're set up right here, we're basically able to update those based on here. You know, you could drag these down and these will show, well, not the week one, I guess, but you can see these will show the right dates. And then you could kind of drop in a huge block of transactions if you wanted to.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm always so impressed by your on-the-fly formula writing, Randy.
Sometimes it works.
That's why Randy's our main template engineer over here. So, all right. Well, I think that's all the questions we had. So appreciate it, Randy, doing the demo and taking those questions, and appreciate everybody for taking the time to join today. Please reach out if you have other questions. We'll get all this posted over on the community, and that link will be emailed tomorrow around this time. Don't forget to take that quick survey. Hold on, we got one more question. Transactions are for actual deposits or withdrawals. When credit card statements arrives, it shows a date 3 or 4 weeks in the future when a withdrawal will occur. I'm wondering if manual transaction would show that future liability. Does that make sense to you, Randy? Larry had asked something and I asked him to clarify, and so I think this is his clarification.
Let me look at that again. I can't see
it. I sort of wasn't really following it. Transactions are for actual deposits or withdrawals. When a credit card statement arrives, it shows a date 3 or 4 weeks in the future when a withdrawal will occur. I'm wondering if manual transaction.
The question is, Heather, that that basically that when you get a charge for a line item off a credit card, you're basically seeing it before you you're seeing it sort of when you incur that liability or that, but not like the expense. And so maybe what the question is that is something about like the timing between when you actually pay money when the statement arrives versus how kind of transactions show up a month before in your transactions feed, do you think?
Maybe, or Larry, if you can clarify, are you speaking specifically about the credit card payment that's due because you're getting the statement balance and you're going to pay that statement balance and you're trying to see if you can manually add that transaction for 3 to 4 weeks? I mean, the tool doesn't limit you in the way that you add the transactions. Like, yes, you could add it, you could add whatever the transaction is, credit card payment expected 3 to 4 weeks from now. There's no limitation in the tool being able to do that. And yes, it would show as if you had already paid that. So if that's what you're referencing, then yes, like the tool is capable of doing it. I think it's just, we're not totally understanding like what the difference might be with the use case. But definitely reach out in the community for more information on that if that explanation doesn't make sense, and we can get you an answer, more detailed answer there, and have a better way to kind of communicate about what you're asking specifically.
Yeah, Heather and I are both in there regularly, so we will find that. Thank you all for joining. Those are some great questions.
For sure.
And again, if you have anything you want to follow up on, we'd be happy to take it in the community or a future call.
All right, Randy, thanks. And thanks, everyone. We will see you in a couple weeks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.